Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Very quietly, the white media announced that, predictably, the Jordan Williams grand jury didn't indict him on either the trumped-up manslaughter charge or the pathetic weapons charge. I made it a point to show everyone the undeniable differences between what was a clear-cut case of self-defense with Mr. Williams and the cold-blooded, deliberate murder of Jordan Neely by Daniel Penny. Everybody understood that the arrest of Mr. Williams really wasn't about him at all. This was actually a pathetic attempt by the authorities in New York to try to lend credence to the idea that Daniel Penny didn't get low charges. Why, anyone would have gotten the same charge, especially a black person. It was a feeble, pathetic white media stunt carried out by the prosecutors there. When a black man is not indicted by a grand jury, that's how you know there was no case there to begin with. Remember, a DA can indict a ham sandwich. All they have to do is merely show that the incident happened, and that's 85% of getting an indictment against someone right there. So for the grand jury, which you know was not black, in racist New York, to say that this young black man with dreads wasn't guilty of manslaughter or even a weapons charge means that it was ridiculously obvious the DA was bringing false charges. And if the grand jury knew it, that racist Brooklyn DA knew it too. These phony charges against Mr. Williams had nothing to do with him at all, nor did the phony white media circus around him either. This was actually an attempt by the crooked prosecutors there to try to prop up the lie that Daniel Penny wasn't being treated with kid gloves. Why, look at the charges against this black guy over here. We would have done the same thing no matter what, which is a lie. Because Jordan Williams had not broken any laws, and it was obvious Jordan Williams was well within his rights. And if you think the Manhattan DA's office wasn't mixed up in this, you're a fool. Mr. Williams' girlfriend was assaulted by the man that he was accused of killing. Mr. Williams himself was also attacked by that same individual. Up until that point, he had remained seated, as had his girlfriend. Daniel Penny, on the other hand, hadn't been attacked by Jordan Neely. In fact, Jordan Neely hadn't attacked anyone on that train. Daniel Penny snuck up behind his victim and strangled him to death. He kept strangling his victim for 15 minutes, even while the other passengers on the train pleaded with him to stop. Police did nothing about the killer Daniel Penny. They let him go home. Prosecutors took 2 weeks to finally do the most obvious thing of all and bring charges against this killer. And they only did that because of the massive citywide outrage and protests. Meanwhile, with Jordan Williams, he was arrested the day of the incident. No waiting 2 weeks to try to look things over and figure out if a crime happened here. Oh no, with Mr. Williams, they got after him immediately. And they did this even though you had people protesting that he shouldn't have been arrested at all. Exactly the opposite of what happened with Daniel Penny. Oh, but there's supposed to be comparison there, right? There was absolutely no comparison between these two incidents at all, other than that they happened on a New York train. Though that hasn't stopped the white media from furiously claiming some sort of phony similarity. The DA of Brooklyn, who's a white Hispanic named Eric Gonzalez, he's clearly on team white supremacy. This corrupt scumbag intentionally misused his office in order to hope forward a phony narrative that if a white person is the subject of a high-profile arrest, then the authorities or the white media better make sure that there's a black person brought in immediately afterwards so that they can claim a false comparison. And that corrupt DA in Brooklyn made sure to bring the same charges against Mr. Williams because he wants to lend credence to the racist lie that the charges against Daniel Penny aren't too low. They're not treating Daniel Penny differently. Why? They would be doing the same thing under any circumstances. It's no different than what happened with Jussie Smollett. Why did they bring 16 charges against Jussie Smollett literally for no crime whatsoever? Because that's what happened with the murderer Jason Van Dyke. He got 16 charges put against him. So this is the white authorities calling themselves retaliating through their office. That's what this is about. And this white media circus was all a pathetic stunt carried out by a crooked DA to push a false narrative that Daniel Penny isn't being treated with kid gloves, he hasn't been undercharged, but we've already knocked down that lie. The Brooklyn DA knew that there was no case against Mr. Williams. He knew from the very beginning there was no way a grand jury would ever indict him because the evidence was so overwhelmingly in Mr. Williams' favor. So why even convene a grand jury at all then? It's because he knows that white supremacy needs a lie to hide behind if they're going to try to protect Daniel Penny. This is one of those incidents where if it goes badly for him, white supremacy suffers a major L. They need Daniel Penny to walk. They don't need merely for there to be probation. They need an acquittal. And this is part of the process of trying to lay the groundwork for that. Why, look at this black guy over here. Yeah, you see what happened here? I mean, the grand jury didn't even come back with an indictment. Yeah, that's because there was absolutely no evidence whatsoever that Mr. Williams did anything wrong. There's a ton of evidence that Daniel Penny committed murder. This was the Brooklyn DA's office trying to help out Daniel Penny by getting this lie, using a scapegoat like Mr. Williams, just to try to manufacture a lie for a couple of news cycles. It doesn't have to stand very long. It doesn't even have to go through. Yeah, the charges are not going to be able to stand scrutiny. The grand jury's going to laugh this one out of court, but that's okay. At least we will have gotten the headlines out there for a couple of news cycles. And then when the kangaroo court predictably blows up in their faces, well, it won't matter because by then the white media will have moved on, which is pretty much what happened. Now, you had a lot of white supremacists who were trying to make hay out of this one so that they could give a pass to the race killer Daniel Penny, but they also predictably tried to justify the arrest of Mr. Williams while they were all the while claiming that this was proof that Daniel Penny shouldn't have been arrested at all. They were trying to justify the arrest of Mr. Williams, saying, well, he had a pocket knife. So these white supremacists can't help themselves. Even when they try to pretend not to be blatantly racist, those Neanderthal genes kick in and they start shooting themselves in the foot regardless. While Mr. Williams' lawyer has said that the white media's comparison to Daniel Penny is overblown, I would prefer to see Mr. Jordan Williams himself say that there's no comparison. Now, you can try to claim that, well, he needs to stay low and stay out of it, but the truth is nothing happens in a vacuum under white supremacy. His lawyer has already spoken on this, so the line's already been crossed. And as long as the white media continues to use Jordan Williams' name and his tragic circumstance to try to lend justification to a cold-blooded killing, in my estimation, he has a moral obligation to at the very least tell the white media to keep his name out of their mouths. Because what the white media will do now is to quietly bury this. They made their false comparison, they got it into the news cycle for a few days. People have seen it. A number of them are going to remember it, even if only vaguely. They'll remember, hey, there was a black guy who got arrested for stabbing somebody on a train allegedly, and, well, the charges got dropped. So it's pretty much the same thing, right? They're not going to remember what the actual facts of the two cases are, because the white media is not going to press that to them. But they will make sure to say, well, the comparison to Daniel Penny, when there's no comparison at all. That's the entire point. That's what this was all about. Had it been a white man who Jordan Williams had been accused of killing, he would have been indicted by the grand jury. Just like John White was when he protected himself and his children and his home from that gang of thugs who had beaten his son at a party and then for a follow-up decided to come to his house. That also happened in New York State, by the way. But the white media overreached with their false comparison, though it's up to us to make the bastards pay for it. Railroading innocent black people for legitimate acts of self-defense while refusing to even bring charges for clear-cut cases of murder can't be allowed to stand. It is not enough merely to point the finger at white supremacists. We have to give white supremacy a slap in the face. Illegal persecution of law-abiding citizens like Jordan Williams has to be punished. But first, it has to be called out. 'Cause I'll make a little prediction for you. If you think that this is the end of the white media's interest in Jordan Williams, I wouldn't bet big money on that. It would not at all surprise me if the white media decided to do a follow-up on Mr. Williams sometime later to see if he gives the legal defense money he collected back, or if some white media outlet or another tries to otherwise scandalize him about that. Hell, it wouldn't even surprise me if that crooked D.A. Gonzalez decided that he was going to go dipping in and saying, well, I need to be looking at this myself, see if there's any fraud charges here. Now, I know what some of you are probably thinking. Hell, there's absolutely no grounds to go after him based on whether or not he refunds crowdfunding money for his legal defense. There's no legal grounds to go after him for anything on that. True, but there also weren't any grounds to go after Mr. Williams for manslaughter or a weapons charge either. Be sure to catch tomorrow's special Moment of Truth. It's a black media tradition, the 4th of July. So make sure that you're in attendance for tomorrow morning's briefing as soon as it posts at 7 a.m. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Eric Bailey, Alice Ransom, Sabrina, Dario Anderson, and Stay Positive. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.